Hi, welcome to A Film Darkly, where I look at the philosophical concepts found within movies. I'm your host, Anthony Paceno, and in this episode we're going to be discussing Ghost in the Shell and the idea of consciousness and what defines consciousness, thus defining what it is to be human. And I say that with quotations. I'm going to be talking about the animated version of Ghost in the Shell that is based on the manga, not the, or adapted from the manga, not the recent film that came out with Scarlett Johansson, which tends to strip away a lot of the philosophical aspects and the theological ideologies that are found within Ghost in the Shell. So, if you haven't seen the animated movie, obviously you should go out and watch it. It's not that long of a movie, and it's actually really, really rich with the philosophy, and it's pretty straightforward. I've seen a lot of individuals try and break this film down, or I've read some and heard some people, and I feel like people like kind of go halfway. Nobody really understands, like they don't always look at the depth of it. Not everyone, but I've just seen that a few times, and one thing I find interesting is when everyone quotes this movie, they never ever quote the theology. They never quote the biblical verses. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, both 11 and 12 are quoted in the film. And I always find it interesting that nobody quotes those verses because those verses have meaning. There's a reason she's quoting Paul in this movie, because there is some meaning behind that. And how it reflects on her journey of trying to find out who she is, which is really what this film is about. It's a journey of trying to figure out consciousness by looking inward at oneself, and that's what the verses are really, really good at defining. It's kind of putting it all into a nutshell. So, as always, I have quotes from the film, and I'm going to use the quotes to break down what the movie is about and what it's trying to convey to you, what this philosophy is. There are some very, very enriched ideas in here that I can talk forever on. So I'm going to try and avoid some of those and try and focus primarily on consciousness in and of itself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start looking at the movie. So early on, there's a point where Major Kusanagi actually states, if we all reacted the same way, we'd be predictable. And there's always more than one way to view a situation. What's true for the group is also true for the individual. It's simple. Over-specialize and you breed in weakness. It's slow death. So she's saying a little bit of a narrative on the future that they live in. And at the same time talking about what it is to be an individual. That we all can't, basically she's saying we can't all react the same way, we can't all be predictable, otherwise we wouldn't be us. We wouldn't be a person. We wouldn't be who we are individualistically. And I find that a lot of people kind of stop there where they think it's just about the individual, but it's not necessarily about the individual itself. To me, it's about the grander consciousness, which I find to be beyond the individual. And it's about stripping away and understanding the individual down to the core. But that's what she's referring to here is the predictability and, basically what she's saying is what makes us individuals is our diversity, our ability to be diverse in who we are. And she says a little more about this, but one of the things she says is that over-specialize and you breed in weakness. It's slow death. And what she means by that is the more you specialize human beings and the more you make us the same or equal, and I say that with quotations, because we are equal to to an extent, but there's areas where we clearly aren't. And when you start to over specialize and you start to change that, you're breeding in weakness. And she says it's slow death. So a good example, like good social examples, would be examples like giving everyone a trophy because they participated, or saying there are no losers, there are only winners. Or another good example would be giving someone the opportunity to get a bachelor's degree when they have Down syndrome. And all the meanwhile, you're lowering the standard in order for them to have that opportunity. Similarly, we see in the fire department. The fire department lowered their standard for females so that they are able to make it into the fire department. But when you do these things, you're, as major states, you're weakening it. And it's slow death. What happens is you weaken what it is to be a firefighter. Because there's a reason those standards are there. You have specific standards to be able to perform specific tasks. If you give a Down syndrome individual the possibility of getting a bachelor's degree, and you lower the standard for them, well, now a bachelor's degree will no longer have the same significance as it did before. Because anyone can have a bachelor's degree. Even those that are mentally handicapped in some way. And so the question, so what happens is you end up with a bachelor's not being important. Now a master's is necessary. Soon a master's isn't as important, and a PhD becomes important. You see this in society all the time. I mean, it's happening right now where bachelor's degree doesn't mean as much because you have so many individuals there getting bachelor's degrees. Probably due to government funding and things like that allow anybody to be able to go to college. And so everyone is getting a bachelor's degree and it gets flooded. And so it no longer becomes significant or special to have a bachelor's degree. It just becomes another degree. So it's kind of like how a high school diploma doesn't mean much now. You might as well have an associate's degree. And for the bigger jobs, associate's degree doesn't mean anything. Bachelor's degree is the only thing that gets your foot in the door, and a bachelor's degree only gets you so far. It's just a foot through the door. Now it's the master's that gets you the position you want. So it's interesting dynamic, but that's a social example. Major speaking about a technological example where everyone starts to become the same. We all become augmented. We all become specialized in some way. Where we don't have poor eyesight. We all have good eyesight. We all have particular things about us that make us individuals. And part of what makes us individuals is our weaknesses. You take away those weaknesses, we're no longer individuals. So she's starting to explore this idea of what it is to be conscious. What it is to be you. And the next quote I have here is one where she kind of states things in a much, much more straightforward manner. She says, "There are countless ingredients that make up the human body and mind, like all the components that make up me as an individual with my own personality. Sure, I have a face and a voice to distinguish myself from others, but my thoughts and memories are unique only to me. And I carry a sense of my own destiny. Each of those things are just a small part of it. I collect information to use it my own way. All of that blends to create a mixture that forms me and gives rise to my conscience. I feel confined, only free to expand myself within boundaries." So what does that mean? Well, the first part is, like I said, is very straightforward. She's saying, I have a face and a voice, but that's not really what makes me me. It's my thoughts and memories that are unique to me. We all have noses, we all have ears, we all have eyeballs. We all have those things, so that's not what makes you you. Even if they could be different and distinguishable from one another. What makes you you is your thoughts and memories. And memories is the key step here. Because memories is what creates individuality. Memories is your history and your ability to reflect on your history, to see what you have been taught, to see your mistakes, your experiences, all these sorts of things that make you you. And I like that she says, I carry a sense of my own destiny. She very much so understands that destiny is a complicated thing. We like to think destiny's in our hands, but is it? You can't prevent some of the things that may happen today that could lead you down a road you don't want to go, down a dark road. You don't know what kind of events can occur. There's lots of things that can happen. So in a sense, we don't control our own destiny. And then there's this whole other aspect of determination, fatalism, or free will. Of course, that's opening up a whole other can of worms that I don't want to open at the moment, because that would just be a really, really big topic and conversation. And in the future, I'll more than likely do a podcast just focused on that. And even that is going to have to be like a several-parter where I'll have to talk about each and every aspect. So she understands that destiny is really only something she partially controls. But she talks about it all being a mixture and a blend that creates her conscience. But what's interesting is she then says, I feel confined, only free to expand myself within boundaries. So what is that? Is that the shell? Is the shell her boundaries? Her brain? Her inability to see the mind of another? To see the other? Is that it? She kind of reflects on this a little in the scene where she's sinking down to the bottom of the ocean and just kind of floating there. And Batu finds her and starts to talk to her. And they're having this whole little conversation. And there's a point where he asks her, what do you see down there? And a voiceover comes in. It's Major's voice, but it's not Major speaking. And Major herself is like confused by it. Batu's confused by it. But what this voice does is it quotes 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 12. It actually only quotes half the verse. And it says, what we see now is like a dim image in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. So what is this saying? It's saying looking in a mirror is seeing face to face. But it's a dim image. In the King James Version, it says, a glass darkly. We see something dark in front of us. We don't see the whole picture. We don't see it all. Because even though we're looking at ourselves face to face, we see a dim image. We only see part of us. Not the whole us. So I'm going to come back to that, but now I'm going to move on to the Puppet Master. And the Puppet Master is sort of the main villain of Ghost in the Shell, though it is not really a villain. I'm probably going to say he a lot because it has a masculine voice, but in reality, it has no physical attributes to define it as male or female, no genetics or anything of that nature. It's just more or less this AI program that has gone rogue, that we see all the time, Skynet and, from Terminator and whatnot, where there's always this idea of becoming alive, becoming aware, and that's what the Puppet Master is. And the Puppet Master explains it, so I'm going to go ahead and just start quoting the Puppet Master so we could get a good gist of what he is and what he thinks of consciousness, which his definitions are very powerful. So there's this one point where he says, it can also be argued that DNA is nothing more than a program designed to preserve itself. Life has become more complex than the overwhelming sea of information. And life, when organized into species, relies upon genes to be its memory system. So man is an individual only because of his intangible memory, and memory cannot be defined. But it defines mankind. The advent of computers and the subsequent accumulation of incalculable data has given rise to a new system of memory and thought parallel to your own. Humanity has underestimated the consequences of computerization. So that last part is just him saying you didn't know what you were creating with computers. But what he's doing here is making a comparison between a computer system and a system of genetics, an organism. DNA, nothing more than a program designed to preserve itself. Life has become complex in the overwhelming sea of information. The more informed we are, the more complex we are as living things. Life, when organized into species, relies upon genes to be its memory system. Its genes is how it remembers things. How you yourself are invented as an individual. How your brain develops, how your lungs and every part of you develops, your heart. So man is an individual only because of his intangible memory. What does he mean by intangible? He means you can't touch it. It's transcendent. And memory cannot be defined, but it defines mankind. So he's saying memory itself can't be defined as a substance. Memory can only be defined by what we understand it to be, which is history. But memory in the sense of being a thing, we can't define it that way. It's transcendent. It's the metaphysics of individuality, and it's a transcendent metaphysics. It's not materialistic whatsoever. What makes you you is not a materialistic thing. And yet you look at someone like the Joker, and his entire idea of humanity is based on material. You are just an animal. That's what you are. But what this is saying, what the Puppet Master is saying is no. To be conscious, in and of itself, transcends the physical. So then he goes on to say the advent of computers and the subsequent accumulation of incalculable data has given rise to a new system of memory and thought parallel to your own. So after he finishes defining what it is to be human, that it has no connection to a physical state, he's saying, so I'm just an accumulation of incalculable data, and a new system of memory that is same as your own has derived. He's saying it's not about the mechanics of it. It's not the machine. However the consciousness comes about is simply the consciousness. And of course, right away they oppose him, and Chief Nakamura, for instance, says, "Nonsense, there is no proof at all that you are a living, thinking life form." Puppet Master responds, "And can you offer me proof of your existence? How can you when neither modern science nor philosophy can explain what life is?" And he's right. Science tells us material things. It doesn't explain to us the transcendent. And philosophy tries to talk transcendence, but it has a difficult time. It's hard. Because we can tell you that memories are transcendent, but I can't tell you what memories are. It's sort of like this underlining. It's the in-between of the physical and the non-physical in thought. In between the empirical evidence and the philosophical evidence. It's weird. It's very, very strange. So he's right. And Chief Aramaki, I think is how you say it, at one point says, "What is it? Artificial intelligence?" The Puppet Master responds, "Incorrect. I am not AI. My code name is Project 2501. I am a living, thinking entity that was created in the sea of information." So he's not an artificial intelligence. In other words, he's not a program. He's beyond program. He's beyond that. He's information that has derived from a non-physical entity, but something more. So, I don't want to repeat myself, so we're going to move on. Near the end of the movie, after Major fights this spider tank, and Batu comes in for the rescue, Major uploads herself into the body that the puppet master is occupying. And that's when they start to have this conversation. And there's points of the conversation I'm gonna retrieve, because it's sort of Major finally coming face to face with the dim image in the mirror. And it's the puppet master revealing something to her that she doesn't realize in his or its end game, and what it's trying to successfully do in the end. And the puppet master at one point says, "I refer to myself as an intelligent life form because I am sentient and I am able to recognize my own existence. But in my present state, I am still incomplete. I lack the most basic processes inherent in all living organisms, reproducing and dying." That's interesting. He says he's incomplete because he lacks the inherent process of a living organism, which is to reproduce and die. Is that incompletion, though? I don't think he means incomplete in the sense of, I'm incomplete, like I'm not really a life form. And he's not. But he is a life form because he's sentient. But he lacks the organism's ability to both reproduce and die. It's what makes you unique as a human being, as a Homo sapien. So Major responds to him and says, "But you can copy yourself." And what she's insinuating there is your program, your software. You can copy. You know, and as long as you could copy, you're reproducing. And as long as you're reproducing, you can be deleted so you can die. But then Puppet Master responds, "A copy is just an identical image. There is the possibility that a single virus could destroy an entire set of systems, and copies do not give rise to variety and originality." This is talking about the identity thing again. Life perpetuates itself through diversity, and this includes the ability to sacrifice itself when necessary. So he's referring back to what Major was saying earlier about not being predictable, making you an individual, over specializing, breeding weakness. He's talking back to that. And so he continues, "Cells repeat the process of degeneration and regeneration until one day they die, obliterating an entire set of memory and information. Only genes remain. Why continually repeat this cycle? Simply to survive by avoiding the weaknesses of an unchanging system." Oh man, there's a lot to think there, to unpack, I mean. So what he's talking still about individuality, but what he's saying about the copy being just an identical image is he's saying the copy itself is just that. It's just an identical image, but there's nothing diverse about it. So it's not real reproduction, because reproduction brings on a completely different identity, a completely different entity. And then he says that a single virus could destroy an entire set of systems, and copies do not give rise to variety and originality. So he's saying that a virus can still destroy the whole thing, can destroy the copy, and because it's not something else, it's not necessarily diverse, it's not necessarily individual. So he's saying that's not the same thing as reproducing and dying. Then he says cells repeat the process of degeneration and regeneration until one day they die, obliterating an entire set of memory and information. In other words, you yourself are made up of thousands or millions, billions probably, or even more than that, of copies. Cell reproduction. That's what makes you you. That's what makes your physical body you. It's lots and lots of copies. So being able to copy himself is like being able to create another cell in his body. It doesn't mean that he has literally like created another individual. He's only created another identical thing as he is. Then he says, only genes remain. Why continually repeat this cycle? Simply to survive by avoiding the weaknesses of an unchanging system. So, in the end there, he almost seems to be saying, I can't reproduce or die, but nor do I really want to. Because why do I want to continue to repeat the cycle? Simply to survive by avoiding the weaknesses of an unchanging system. So what's weak about a system that can't change? What's weak about a physical entity that cannot change? Consciousness is far above that. And there's a weakness to it when it cannot change. There's no point in copies. There's only point in individuality. And if he can reproduce individuality, that is something else. And if that thing can die, it makes it important and significant. So that's why he thinks he's incomplete. It's not that he desires the physical body. It's that what the physical body can do that this puppet master cannot. Create individuality and die as an individual. So that's what he's talking about there. So there's something to our physical body being what it is. And he's saying there's some significance there. There's importance there. He himself, though, is not going to go through a process of copying himself 1,000 times over. There's no point. It's better to have individuals. So it seems as though the puppet master is somewhat, in a way, contradicting himself, because he's saying, look, it doesn't take a physical body in order to come up with a consciousness. A consciousness can derive from anything so long as it creates the memories and the identity. But at the same time, he's saying, I'm incomplete because I can't do what you can do. I can't create another individual that is different from myself. And I cannot die. So he drops a proposal. And he wants to combine himself or join with Major Kusanagi. He wants to become one with her so that they can become one identity, so to speak, or one consciousness. See, if you cannot die and you cannot reproduce individuality, why not join individualities to become one whole? That's what he's proposing. And so Major's concerned, and she says, you talk about redefining my identity. I want to guarantee that I can still be myself. So what does she mean by that? She means herself. Well, what's her? Is it just her memories and her identity? Is that going to go away? Is that going to go away? In her mind, it seems like it might. But it may be that she's actually looking at things in a different way. And the puppet master responds to this, and he says, there isn't one. No, there isn't no guarantee. Why would you wish to? It's an interesting question. All things change in a dynamic environment. Your effort to remain what you are is what limits you. Wow. This goes back to the dim image in the mirror. The reason your image is dim is because you don't see you. You see physical you. You see what limits you. What is, as Major says early on, the boundaries. The boundaries of your mind. Is that physical you? but there's something beyond you. And that mind is a transcendent thing, because memories cannot be defined, and neither are they intangible. So what makes you you is transcendent of you, yet when you look in the mirror, you see you. But that's what limits you. The puppet master continues. We have been subordinate to our limitations until now. The time has come to cast aside these bonds and to elevate our consciousness to a higher plane. It is time to become part of all things. So he's talking about doing away with the human body, because he's saying we've always been subordinate to those limitations. And so that's going into his grand master plan of consciousness all becoming one whole thing and no longer having identity in the sense of each individual self, and no longer being limited to the physical form, but becoming more than that. And we can discuss whether or not there's the ethical repercussions of something like that, or what that might mean in general. But I think that I want to use this more for the individuality part of it, aspect of it all, not so much about the conclusion of the puppet master and what the puppet master ultimately wants to achieve. So at the very, very end, Kusanagi Major has a new body, a new shell. And at this point, she has combined with the puppet master and And Batu asks her, what was the conversation the two of you had? What happened, basically? And Kusanagi responds by saying that she remembers the first part of Corinthians. And she remembers the verse 11. And she quotes it. When I was a child, my speech, feelings, and thinking were all those of a child. Now that I am a man, I have no more use for childish ways. Then she says, and now that I can say these things without help in my own voice, because I am now neither the woman who was known as the Major, nor am I the program called the Puppet Master. She's saying I've expanded beyond my original identity. I'm now something else entirely. And this is referring to Puppet Masters. It's time to cast aside the bonds and to elevate our consciousness to a higher plane. So Major is saying, I'm no longer Major, and the Puppet Master is no longer the Puppet Master. We have joined consciousness, and now we are on a higher plane. But we exist within this one shell. But it's not us. Who we are is something else. So by combining the two consciousness, they can no longer call themselves one individual self. And it's difficult to look at a body and say, this body is who I am, because you're beyond that. In fact, you're two identities that have been combined. So what this means for the future, well, really, really depends. And it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic of what that means for there to be this grander consciousness of combined consciousnesses that Ghost in the Shell is kind of leaving for you to think about. But ultimately, the Puppet Master and Major are both giving us two different things. The Major is showing us the journey, and the Puppet Master is showing us the ends. The Puppet Master is telling us that the dim image is the physical body, and that the physical body isn't necessarily what makes you you. It's your memories. It's the intangible, transcendent memories that you have that go beyond your physical you. And no matter where they might derive, memories that is, as long as memories derive, that thing is conscience. And that is very specific to humanity at this point. So what it is to be human is to be conscious. Thus, you can even define something like the Puppet Master as human. At least, or what we call human. So, that's going to do it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It went on a little longer than usual. So, In my next episode, I'm actually going to be discussing Groundhog Day, and we're going to talk a little bit about the ethical issues there. And it's going to be kind of an alternative to the Watchmen, to the Joker, that is going to be a reflection, or like I said, it's better well put, an alternative to those. And how Ghost in the Shell ties in? Well, it ties in by looking at what it is to be a human being, to be transcendent. We're looking at that so that we can understand that it's not all material like the Joker thinks, but there's something more. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for listening. You guys have a good day.